for joining us today and welcome to my sewing room. We have a really fascinating topic for you today, Madeira Applique, lots of different applications. Madeira Applique borders are one of my favorite things to do in sewing. This lovely little dress is a little white linen dress and it has a green collar of Madeira Applique. In other words, a Madeira Applique border. There are also some lovely little silk ribbon stitches right above the Madeira Applique border. Let me show you the skirt of this dress too. Let me open it up so you can see it. See the little Madeira Applique on the bottom of the skirt, and it's tiny little touches of silk ribbon embroidery where the peaks are. White on white has always been one of my favorites, of course, for clothing. This lady's blouse of Swiss organdy has a Madeira Applique border collar done in, it's a pretty, just another row of organdy. It is stitched with a wonderful silver metallic stitch, and the trim right here is a built-in stitch out of one of our sewing machines. This Madeira Applique, this is a dickie that you would wear under a suit. And this Madeira Applique collar, the black border is on the white collar. Let me turn it all the way around so you can see this lovely Madeira Applique border. A copy of a little antique dress is this lovely little dress with the Madeira Applique around the neckline. And now, coming down the front of the dress, this is Shadow Applique by Machine, which we had on an earlier show, very easy to do, and then it ends in the sweetest little Madeira Applique border on the hem of this dress, a little white and pink and blue dress. This elegant baby day gown, one just like this, was made for one of my granddaughters to wear home from the hospital. It has the Madeira Applique figures that come down the front, and then there is a corner piece also of Madeira Applique. The dress is also trimmed with a really pretty tatting. You know, there's not a whole lot any more elegant than tatting for trim. Here is another Madeira Applique border on this very tailored square collared lady's blouse. It is also trimmed around the Madeira Applique border with an entredot wing needle stitch done in a darker turquoise than the turquoise linen on this collar. This dress is a little blue and white dress with a little pinafore, a little organdy pinafore. The Madeira Applique on this dress is in the form of these little bluebirds. This is a Swiss trim, and the Madeira Applique was done using the little bluebirds instead of a solid color, as we've shown you on some of the other borders. Actually, Madeira Applique is really easy to do, and if you'll come over to the boards, the teaching boards, I'll show you more about doing Madeira Applique. Making a Madeira Applique motif the easy way is what I'm going to share with you now. First of all, I draw the design, in this case a little simple heart, on my fashion fabric. Then I using a piece of water-soluble stabilizer, I put the water-soluble stabilizer on top of the fabric, and then I stitch around. Do you see how I've stitched around where I drew the heart? Next, take a little pair of scissors and make a slit in the water-soluble stabilizer only, and then turn your heart right side out. In other words, turn it right side out. Uh-oh, it's about to fall off there. Let me pin it back up. Then, here's what it looks like. After you've turned it right side out from that little slit in the water-soluble stabilizer, you see it's still on the back here, then I put it down on my garment or on my quilt square or whatever I'm going to do, the Madeira Applique, and then I pin stitch all the way around the heart. And this is what it looks like when it's finished. My little Madeira Applique heart, and I do not use a black thread, of course, when I'm putting it on a garment. I use a matching thread, and that is the easy way to do Madeira Applique. Next, I have a Madeira Applique border, which I would like to share with you because I showed you some garments earlier that had those wonderful borders with a Madeira Applique, another color that went around the collar. We'd like to share that technique with you now on a quilt square. I am happy to have as my guest today Kathy Brower. Kathy is the embroidery editor for Sew Beautiful magazine. She is going to share with you now a Madeira Applique border on the quilt square. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you, Martha. I'm so glad Martha invited me to do Madeira Applique. I love this technique, and I'm sure when you find out how easy it is to do, you're going to love it too. I'd like to show you what we've done with our quilt square. Here we have, and don't pay attention to the silk ribbon, we're going to be doing the Madeira Applique. This is our Madeira Applique border, and I'm going to show you how to make this border. But right now I want you to see how pretty the stitching is around this border. This is a pin stitch, and this is done with our machine. You can also do this by hand with a Point de Paris stitch, or if you don't have a fancy machine, you can use a zigzag. I'm going to place the quilt on the other side, and what you want to do is start out with your base fabric. Starch it very well. Starch it 2 or 3 times. Get it really, really stiff, and that's important. We want to, after we starch the fabric, we're going to put our template underneath and draw off our design lines. You'll be doing this with a washout marker. We've done it in black pen for you to see it easily. After you've done that, you want to put a water-soluble stabilizer on top on the right side of your Madeira fabric. As you can see the design lines underneath. This type of stabilizer is excellent because it's very giving, it's flimsy, and it turns well. Once we've done that, we will stitch around the Madeira design with a very small straight stitch, a 1 or a 1.5, to give a really nice tight line around there. And as you see on the back, we've gone completely around our design. You'll want to do this in matching thread. We've done it in yellow thread for you to see it, but you would use matching thread so it won't show later on. The next step is to apply your base fabric, the other color that you'll be using that will peek behind your Madeira opening. You'll layer your Madeira colored fabric on top with your stabilizer facing you. Then you can baste around this or pin it if you want to. Then you'll want to cut away, leaving about 1/4 of an inch seam line or 1/8 of an inch seam, well, not a seam but an allowance away from this Madeira stitching here. You want to come in and clip all of your curves and inside all of your corners, and you'll begin turning this. You also might want to cut some of your stabilizer away so it doesn't bunch up underneath there. And you'll turn this just like a facing. And you might want to use like a wooden point turner when you do this to get all your curves nice and straight. It's kind of hard to do right here. But as you see, when you turn that under, you'll get a nice clean edge as we've done right here. Next, and you'll just remove this and toss it to the side. Next, you'll want to use, when you've done all of this, you want to press it to get a nice straight edge. And I'm going to be doing the stitching without stabilizer underneath. You can use stabilizer underneath if you want to, but this has been starched and stiffened so well, and it also has the stiff stabilizer underneath it, so it's going to hold up really well under our sewing machine. Let me move to the sewing machine now, and I'm going to start in the corner. I've already stitched one side for you, and I'm using the pin stitch on my machine, and I have a 2-point stitch length and a 1.5 stitch width. I'm going to set this down. I'm also using a 100 needle, or you can use a 120 needle or a wing needle because you want to make a nice hole. I'm just going to line that up with my presser foot and begin stitching. Goes a little slow at first, but that's good because you've got a lot of curves to go around and points. When you get to a point, you just put your needle down and pivot and start again in the other direction. And it's as easy as that. It makes a beautiful border for collars, for baby clothes, for pillows. It's a wonderful technique.
Well, Kathy, it's also a very easy technique, and I thank you so much for sharing this lovely quilt square.
Thank you, Martha.
Since we showed our viewers the Madeira Applique on several collars, I thought it might be a good idea for me to go to the boards and share with you exactly how that technique is done on a collar. This little dress has the Madeira Applique border on the white collar. Now, as you can see, the colors that we have chosen are, this is sort of a green. I'll call it green, although it's really more of a robin's egg blue. I'll call it green for the Madeira Applique border and white for the collar. And isn't that wonderful to put the little silk ribbon embroidery in there also? Here are the principles for making a collar. I have the green fabric now. I have a whole collar cut out of the green fabric, and I have the water-soluble stabilizer, a big piece of that, also right on top of the green fabric for the collar. This is going to be the border part. So I come in and straight stitch all the way around the Madeira Applique border design, and I stitch through the water-soluble stabilizer as well as through the green part of the collar. Now I come over here to the next step. The white portion, the white fabric I have here is the actual collar. So I put the collar down on top of the water-soluble stabilizer, and the green fabric is underneath here. So I put the collar down on top as if it's a lining, and then I stitch all the way around the edge, joining the collar and the Madeira Applique green collar. Okay, I have the two collars joined at this time. The next step is to turn the collar right side out. In other words, put the white part on the bottom and the green part is on the top. Just as Kathy did, I come in here now and trim away the green part and the solvy. Now look, this is really important. Come down here with me, please. Do you see how I have left about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance? Okay. And then on the curves, I come back in and I trim the curves all the way around. In other words, I remove all of the excess part of the green collar. Next step is to come in here. Let me kind of pin this out of my way half a second. Get that kind of pinned up. Now, come in here and turn the seam allowance under. In other words, turn the solvy part back, and that makes a nice, pretty, finished curve. By turning that little seam allowance and the solvy, I have a finished curve. I go all along the bottom. I need a little point turner too, actually, but you see the point there. And you see I turn it right side out using the solvy to do the turning. And the last step, come over here and look at it finished. After I've turned the solvy under, you see I have a completely finished Madeira Applique border on this collar. It is now time to go back and do my Madeira Applique stitch, my pin stitch, my point de Paris stitch, and finish it off. And that is how simple it is to make a Madeira Applique collar. My doll has on a lovely ecru batiste dress which features a beautiful Madeira Applique border collar, a lovely Madeira Applique motif in the center of the skirt, and a beautiful Madeira Applique scalloped border around the bottom of the skirt. Let's see how easy it is to do that. First, I'd like to share with you making the motif that goes on the skirt. I have my base fabric, which I've drawn the motif onto, and my water-soluble stabilizer. I stitch all the way around the motif, cut it out, then clip the water-soluble stabilizer so I can turn the motif right side out. Okay, here I've done that. See, I clipped the water-soluble stabilizer. The motif has been turned right side out. All of those sides are finished. And I put them down on my fabric and zigzag all the way around it. That's the motif on her skirt. Here is the collar. Trace the collar off on your border fabric, in other words, the green, or in the case of the doll dress, the blue. Put my water-soluble stabilizer down, sew around the border on the water-soluble stabilizer. Then I cut away the collar and the water-soluble stabilizer. I don't need that anymore because that will just be, that's the center part. Next step, stitch all the way around the collar in order to put the collar together. Then cut away this center section, turn it right side out, come down to the bottom and clip the water-soluble stabilizer where I can then turn it up after clipping the corners and leaving the seam allowance, where I can bring it up and turn the little border back And here is what it looks like when it's all finished and the Point de Paris stitch has been stitched around it. Next, we have a wool embroidery stitch for you. I am so pleased to have as my guest today Esther Randall. Esther is the author of the book Esther's Silk Ribbon Embroidery. Welcome to the program, Esther.
Thanks, Martha. By the time we finish with our wool embroidery work, we're going to have them all hooked on wool embroidery.
All right.
Today we're going to work on the Bullion rose. And I know that the Bullion rose is a very popular stitch. It's a very popular embellishment with the all sorts of heirloom embroidery, any type of embroidery. You know, there's an old saying that says, we make roses in July, so we have them in December. And that's what we do with embroidery work. Let's do a Bullion rose. Knot your thread, pull it up don't tug, don't pull it so tight that it goes right through. You don't want to treat wool embroidery that way. You want to make it very gentle. With your thumb, hold the thread down, bring it down. And the reason that I'm using a small hoop is because I want to be able to have my hands control this thread. So what I'm going to do is put my needle down the size that I want my rose. I'm going to wrap this as many times as I need to make that bullion stitch the size that I want. Now don't pull your thread so tight that your needle won't slide easily through. Then with your thumb, hold your stitches down and pull it through. And if it isn't pulled too tight, then you can see how easily that comes through. Now pull it up with your needle, control that stitch, and keep pulling and controlling with the needle. Now, back down. If I want this next stitch to wrap around, then I'm going to come up and pull my stitch to that side, do my wrapping, and you see there when you have a small hoop, if you have a hoop so large that you can't get into it, then that would be a detriment to your stitching. Roll it as many times as you need, not too tight, keeping that in mind. With your thumb, holding this down and pulling your needle through. And sometimes it won't go through the way you want it, but just be patient and keep working. With your needle, now you're controlling and you're wrapping this stitch. And then we'll go back down.
Esther, thank you so much. Next, we have a wonderful home decorating idea for you. This Madeira Applique pillow has a Madeira Applique inset as well as Madeira Applique border. Here is the little Madeira Applique inset, and here is the Madeira Applique border. It's peach and it has a little pale green, and then the little cameo is simply glued on. How do you make it? Very easy. Here we go. A little bit different technique though I'm going to show you right now. The first thing I do on the peach fabric, which is the border fabric, is to trace off the design and then stitch around the design. I'm not going to use the water-soluble stabilizer on this pillow. I'm going to show you a more traditional manner of doing Madeira Applique. All right, you stitch around the design, and then leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I cut away the inside design, then clip the curves and begin to turn this area under. In other words, turn it under right on or a little bit below the seam line that you have made. In other words, turn it under by hand. Then you see the green fabric is the base fabric. After you've turned it under all the way around, you can see how I have already done the applique stitch, the pin stitch or the Point de Paris on this side. Now this is the little Madeira Applique oval for the center. I used 2 pieces of fabric, stitch them together and turn them right side out, and then you stitch that down. The little cameo, which was the center of the pillow, is simply glued down in the center, and I also put a little bit of gold braid around it, stitch around it, and then the edging of this pillow is entre deux and another really pretty Swiss trim just zigzag together. And that's all there is to making that lovely Cameo Madeira Applique pillow. Next, I have a fun and very, very easy craft for you. This is such an easy project. Making a lace-covered bud vase, or you could cover any kind of little flower vase that you wanted to, using simply glue and goodies and a vase. I have a little vase down here, and we simply took scraps. This is a great way to use your scraps. We took scraps and began to glue it on the little glass bud vase. Here's a little piece of tatting. Just simply use your fabric glue or your any kind of clear drying glue. Put it on here and put your little tatted piece down, and then you can glue it again if you want to. Now, here are some other little pieces that I used. You can make them travel up and down on the little bud vase in any direction you want to. Travel it around. Some more little pieces which could go around the bottom or around the top. And this is kind of interesting too. You might even take just a little fancy string, I'll call this, and make it travel around. Move it in any direction you want to. Just glue it down and have fun. Now that is an easy project to use your bits and pieces and scraps of lace and little tiny things that you don't know what to do with, but you certainly don't want to throw them away. I love to collect antique clothes. Come with me to my attic because I have some treasures I would like to share with you. I have two really beautiful antique dresses to share with you today. The first one is a little midi dress. It's very unusual in the top because it has the little raglan sleeve. The top is in one piece all the way across. The top has embroidery in the center, hand embroidery I might add. And what I think is so precious about this little dress is these ribbons that are on the shoulder. It's an idea you could use today also. The little ribbons are run through the shoulder, and they're run through handmade buttonholes. One buttonhole, one buttonhole. Here's another buttonhole, another buttonhole. And then there's one buttonhole right here where the little folds in the ribbon come out. Absolutely a precious little dress. And to tell you the truth, any little dress, a little basic yoke dress would be so sweet with the little buttonholes and the little ribbons run right across like this. The other little dress is not really that old. My guess would be this is probably a little dress from the 40s, but it's very unusual. The dress is made of ribbons and lace insertion, ribbon, wider lace insertion, more lace insertion. By the way, see this little ruffle that's here on the bodice also? That's kind of cute, the way that's gathered around the bodice. Then here begins the skirt. It has ribbon, insertion, ribbon, insertion, ribbon, insertion, and then the edging is on the very edge with some little gathered edging. This is a very sweet little dress, and I think one of the really popular trends in making some of the heirloom party dresses has been to use ribbon and laces butted together and zigzagged. For my Sewing from the Heart segment today, I would like to share with you that there are a number of quilting guilds and sewing machine clubs that are meeting around the country that are making small, easy-to-make quilts to send out when the social workers and the police have to pick up abused children. It seems that there's some degree of comfort in a quilt when they have to take the child away from his or her home and take them to a foster home. They keep the quilts in the trunk of the police car, and the policemen and the social workers get out this brand new beautiful quilt and wrap the child up in it and tell them that this is something very special that they're going to get to keep as they have to take them away from their homes, many times in the middle of the night. That's a great idea, and I bet some of you might enjoy doing that also. It has really been my pleasure for me to have you with me today in my sewing room, and I would certainly like to invite you to join us next time.